Oh, good morning. Actually, it's just about afternoon here in the beach community of Meduk, not far from Tetuan. We'll be going later on this afternoon to the school where I made a previous video, and we'll sit in on a class on Islamic human rights in Islam. These great things going on here for students. Someone wrote on the discussion thread early in the week that there's really a lot to discuss in Catching Fire, and the subject matters will become even more uh, compelling as you get to book three. It's nice to read these books in the context of a class online and whatever, and sharing information and ideas. Uh, and I think it'll enhance your reading as you go through. Now, I'm not going to give a lot of information on book three here. By the way, there's a lot of birds here, so you'll hear them. uh, but I wanted to just set the context instead of just telling you everything that happens. It was interesting this morning reading the New York Times. That's nice to be able to do with the satellite cable that we have out here in the project along the beach. Um, the NSA revelations by Snowden. Um, I'm not going to comment on my own particular feelings about this, but it did bring up an important point that you're going to find in book three, and you want to keep that in mind because you are going in hovercraft from District 13 to the underground facility um, that is District 13, yes, but with a leader named Coin. Um, and her full name basically means something like pure money. and as you know, you can have a lot of fun with the game instead of Coriolanus. No, Coriolanus, if you look it up, is a Roman Empire of ambiguous stature. Um, but remember he said to Katniss, "Let's just make a pact not to lie to each other." And when she gets there to District 13, they're so grateful for what happened, but then you want to look into the details because in many respects District 13 is the flip coin of capital. Um, and so looking at that, it's sort of like the difference between the extremes of Sparta. They have a Spartan existence, we'd say, in 13, but also of Athens with its kind of abundance and look of democracy. And I've argued elsewhere that this kind of combination is not necessarily from just Rome or classical Greece, but also has parallels in contemporary government. And here you can look at a kind of a Cold War situation where both extremes are wrong. And I think a lot of young people are dissuaded from going into or getting involved in community and other kinds of politics because they see, a pox on both your faces with what John Avalon has called wing nuts. And that's just people on the far, far right and on the far, far left. But this NRA thing, surveillance of calls and email, not looking into the documents, that's a mistake, but just looking, as computer geeks would like to do, like the Snowden guy, at combinations that would lead towards a suspect and then getting let's say, a search warrant based upon specific, and in this case, rather scientific, haphazard, but science often is, information to say, look, there's a potential Boston Marathon, or worse, let's say, someone using a heat seeking missile that they've captured from when Gaddafi fell, with the ability to, let's say, shoot down passenger jets. They're looking for this kind of thing. Now, uh, the civil libertarians, of course, are going wild on this one, this invasion of privacy, and you can look where you want. But one of the big things about Capitol and also District 13 is the idea of gathering information. Now, this will become big time in some of the other books we'll read. Uh, there's always the potential for abuse, as there is with anything else. I was thinking about this today. I mean, snow in particular has tremendous surveillance capacities, and it's used in the ways that everybody fears that this kind of technology could be used to, let's say, go after tax invaders or whatever. Now, I'm not suggesting that Obama has these intentions or that George Bush would have. Did obviously not. However, as you might keep in mind, is that technology is itself rather neutral. It depends on how you do it. As we say, dual use technologies. One can be used to make us safer, one can be used for special interests like finding tax invaders or evaders or anything like that, people cheating on their college loans or even their wives. But the one idea to keep in mind is that the intentions with which people develop these technologies have a tendency to outlive the originators. So there's a potential for abuse, and of course, Snow was able to do it in and so is Coin in the name of safety. And so that's why he keeps showing the loops of people visiting, the footage of District 13 after the war when there was smoldering and things like this, and you can catch the as Katniss does in the second book, the sort of the shimmer, which is the defect of the lie, or whatever, however you want to look at it. And Twill and Bite have noticed this shimmering, if you will, and to say that look at that Mockingjay is looping, and of course that Mockingjay figure informs the text, as we see in book 2, where she basically becomes the Mockingjay with her when she lifts her arms and whatnot. And of course, Senna is killed for that because we can't afford to let people go without punishment. So there are lots of ways to ensure no one has impunity. So think about that while you're reading them. When you contrast Snow and Coin, who embody, if you will, the good and the bad. Snow is obviously as Finnick. That's something to keep in mind. Finnick, remember, he said, she said, well, what advantage do you get from, being involved with all these people to Finnick? And he says, I trade secrets. And so pay attention to that, because he has secrets that will add ammunition to the fire that consumes the districts. And then you want to ask, too, about, and by the way, Katniss asks our questions. Keep that in mind. She'll say, well, in many ways, District 13 is even more controlling, obviously, than Capital. And there's a reason, and again, it is here again security. Now, why do they join the fight? Why did they wait on the sidelines while everybody else was shooting everybody? And you want to keep that in mind, the whole idea of Snow's motivations, because Katniss will become aware of them because she's had a good teacher, Coin. The Coin's behind-the-scenes manipulation. She needs the symbol, and everybody's afraid of the symbol because the symbol can turn against you, just the way the Jabberjays turned against Capital. This is the idea: is that yes, we can use Katniss as a symbol, but that symbol can turn on us the way the one does that's flying in the loop of District 13, and the very way that Katniss becomes the Mockingjay, but she's still Katniss. And so these kinds of tools, these dual-use technologies and also symbols, have a way of turning against the intentions. We call this like the unintended consequences. The unintended consequences of Snow's regime and what goes on is Katniss becoming the Mockingjay, and therefore a threat to all, if you will, dictators. And so pay attention to that dynamic, because it's very, very interesting as you read through the last book. So look at the organization of 13, where you wear tattooed schedules, and the fears there. Also, let's just face it, the people have a better idea a lot of times of what's going on. And you have someone who's a lifer, 75 years, they've been building this place, like Boggs. And what's his relationship to his commander-in-chief? And also by recognition there, what's the relationship between the military? And this is a very militaristic society, as you find out what happens to Bete, who survives the games, and where he goes to work, and the effect that all that has on Gale, who is a fighter. And then who will, let's say, the Katniss choose, and why? she'll, and you can read that. I won't give that away. I just want you to look at how it develops, because Peta is not going away. Our boy Bread. His name is a kind of bread, by the way, and so is Panem. Panem, panis. This is basically a Roman word for bread, and it's not certainly. It's the bread you need, or the kind that rains down on you for free. And this, I suggest to you, for politics and everything, is what Plutarch, I think, says. It's brought up at the end. It's called Panem and Circes, which means bread and entertainment or circuses. And I can tell you this as much. Juvenal, we don't get juvenile as in adolescent from his name, but he was a sarcastic poet of the Roman period, later Augustine, I think. I have to look up that for sure. But he wrote these very, very strong attacks against Rome. I mean, in a place that, let's just say that it wasn't all that free, as far as what you said. Some poet like Ovid will piss off Augustus, and Augustus will send him off to the ends of the Roman Empire and force him to live there alone and in isolation as punishment for something that that Augustus didn't like. I mean, they didn't always have their hands cut off, or that's very Elizabethan. But Juvenal wrote a poem that obviously Collins knows and uses in the story, and that was the Roman population, and Juvenal's attacking them. He's a very conservative. He wants to go back to the days of the Republic, when you had senators and there wasn't an emperor. That's when Julius Caesar, that's why he's killed at Tu Brute. That's the Ides of March. Julius Caesar had refused the crown of emperor, and looks like he was going to accept it, and he was murdered by so-called Republicans, and that starts the Civil War. And what happens, though, is the Romans were given subsidized food, bread, enough to survive on. Rome was rich because of all the provinces, including places like I am right now in Morocco, and the Maghreb area of Morocco, Tunisia, and Libya. Lots of Roman and Phoenician fortifications here for the security of Rome, but also to take things in. And so Juvenal's arguing that because people have gotten used to these entertainments, by the way, Hunger Games, gladiators, people killed for the entertainment of people. Some great gladiators, if you see the movie Gladiator, you find that some of them are given their freedom and become wealthy. And so there is a lot of that in there. But there's also the price that's paid, the unintended consequences. If you take the entertainment, that which was given the population, and think of what snow does, the conspicuous consumption there, of course it's overboard to make the point, if you will. If you do that, what is the sacrifice? I mean, everybody lives in relative security in capital. And that security is guaranteed by Snow's repressive use of propaganda, abuse of media, all those things. And you have to ask, what is the price? What is the price of comfort? Are you willing to give up of your freedom for discipline? And then the discipline part, of course, brings to mind much more how Coin operates. And see what she does, what Coin does to Katniss's style team. And I'm sorry, the stylist, I can't remember what they're called. Every time I get on the video, I forget their names. The price that's paid for the comfort that discipline brings. What price for your freedom? And that's a little bit, now Seneca, Juvenal was arguing, watch out, because in another of his satires, that's what they're called, in another of his satires, by the way, he says, basically, who's watching the Watchmen? And that comes from the Moore's graphic novel Watchmen and the movie that was made. That's the idea, is that, who's watching over the people who are watching? Who's watching over the NRA surveillance? And that, who's watching the Watchmen? If that, gets out of hand, then you have the extremism that we find in District 13 and Capitol. So that's, and in one of the satires, and this ties in exactly with what is going on in the first two books, the coming of the fire, that will engulf the entire district is the question of, he says, right now, he says, at the end of that satire, he says, and the ovens are starting to warm up. And that will be the price, the killing off of all people who are not in agreement, or all these other kinds of things that will come from not watching those whom we give the power to watch over us. And that's a core issue in this dystopia. And we've talked about in the discussion threads, and I've talked about here, other manifestations of these concerns that will rise to the top in other books that we read. And this has to do with politics of today, issues with which we deal, as in identity. How much emphasis, or for a young person reading this book, I mean, how much can you accomplish as an individual to bring about change? And what's the effect on you? And one of them is, as you're going to find out as this book progresses, that if involvement means getting your hands dirty. Dirty Hands is the name of a play of Jean-Paul Sartre. If you're going to get involved in it, especially a corrupt society, you're going to get dirty hands too. It's difficult to avoid. But what are the consequences of involvement? Think of the wounds. Peta has one leg gone, she's been cut, and these kinds of things will continue on. One of the other things I wanted to tell you, there are books out and around, both available, I think. I know this one is available on Kindle. This is the first book of essays, critical essays on the trilogy. And I'm very happy about this one because, in fact, the lead article is mine. So there you go. And another book of interest came out right. These were rushed through publication. Is Approaching the Hunger Games trilogy. Neither book is written for a strictly academic audience, which means lots of quotations from Marxist critics and other kinds of things on post-colonialism, postmodernism. It's made for the general and enlightened readers such as yourselves. There's a book out on proper names. There's another one called The Philosophy of the Hunger Games. A lot of them, I think, the other two titles are probably perhaps hastily written, but they're available out there for you to continue and research. If you get one like this, or of Bread and Blood and the Hunger Games, they're going to take you through all different perspectives. Now, you invest your research in reading one of these or looking through a couple of essays, and what you find is what you gather from them as far as the issues confronted will obtain as we progress with the other books that you'll read. That's my promise to you. Nothing wasted in that sense of things. So look at the organizations and the motivations of District 13, the manner in which the pox epidemic has made District 13 so they need something. Everybody has a need and a motivation. Ask the uses of technology, who's right. Gender roles is important. Questions of love are important, because what is more individual for a person is, I want, I choose. Both of them not so much in vogue in either Capital's case or District 12's, or certainly not District 13's. Remember, District 12, there aren't not even any freedoms allowed, but one of them is that you can choose your spouse. And of course, that choice is mitigated, if you will, or complicated for Katniss because of the intercession of the demands of the actual world that is created in the Hunger Games, of the apocalyptic United States, the difference between Denver, high altitude, easily defended, and, of course, where Katniss lives in Appalachia. Now, District 13 and also Capital are not unfamiliar to the world of dystopia and science fiction. I mean, there's a base under a mountain in Colorado, basically, and this is used in a lot of text, including the Terminator series, where the youngsters go there to try to stop the future and things like that. Also, there was a place built for the politics of the era, not far from Washington, where high officials and their wives and children, if you will, and things like that, were to go in case of um, nuclear war. I mean, by the way, these kinds of tunnels and stuff are throughout Switzerland and other places, China. We see these kinds of places built so you could, just the way if you see a movie like Failsafe, they're saying we could go into our bunkers and live for 12 years and then come out to a new world. So you take this reality and you push it into the future and you combine things and you end up with something marvelous like this trilogy. Um, One other thing is think in terms of what that Mockingjay means. And I've been throwing things out right and left, if you will, fodder for you to use in your discussion threads and the papers you will eventually write that don't have to be over the Hunger Games. You can read ahead, read a related book, whatever you want to do. Just contact me about it and I'll put together a video soon enough to talk about how would you go about writing a paper. And I've given you links to talking about the assignments for writing that I've given for the um, traditional class. And you can see that, and you can see a little bit shorter essays sometimes of what people did. So you have lots of information. You even have a video on how to revise and write critical analysis. That's what we're looking for. That's what I'm pushing you for. In the discussion threads with my notes, not I don't like this book, it falls flat. No, yeah, that's the easy way out. Engage yourself in some of the issues, and you'll find that you'll have a bigger stake in the book, and your questions will be answered, and your horizons will be expanded. The other thing to look about that makes this series, still controversial, you'll find even people like Tatar, Tatar, Maria Tatar, is a children's literature specialist who's concerned about the level of violence in these books for young adult readers. But on the other hand, you'll find others who are very, very much interested in this who praise it. One way to look at it, and this is something I talk about in my article, is there's and I can't remember his name right now, it doesn't really matter, but it's talking about progressive literature, and usually we align that with the far left and things like that, but it's, let's say, a literature that motivates people to some action that may well be political. And one of the problems of adolescent literature, it has been a recurring problem and controversy in children's literature. I mean, how much about the real world and its sophistication and experiential qualities do you tell youngsters? Do we just protect them the way in Victorian, where you have Kipling writing a poem about, a beautifully imaginative poem about a young boy in bed, pretending his bed is a ship, writing about the incredible fascination of shadows. But he lives in basically a protected garden. You want childhood is special and you want them to enjoy all that. So let's say you regulate exactly what people watch on TV. But a lot of the writers from the 70s on, what we would call the second flowering of children's literature, are talking about writing about things like growing up in the projects in Detroit of a young black boy. A poet named Clifton wrote about that. And, it's a little boy writing, but in there you have the mother working all the time. The father only comes to visit once in a while. There's sirens going off at night. Um, I'm trying to remember his name. Again, it always escapes me, but he wrote The Iron Giant and said, children deserve to be told the truth. And you have to offer it with a prophylactic, a protected covering. So when you're looking at this, you find that your series of books, one thing to keep in mind is, we want to entertain. This series of books is violent. How does it end? How do you get out of it? And that's always been a bane of a lot of dystopian fiction, including the Iron Giant. In the end, it does bring up tensions of the Cold War and everything, but in the end, Ted Hughes always basically allowed for a happy ending for for children, youngsters, not so for adults. And yet here we have a book like this that's aimed for, a kind of a similar audience, maybe not for the Iron Giant, but for the Iron Woman, which is about the devastation of the environment, something that will concern us in the next book. And still, how do you go about that? A lot of these books, they set up a kind of situation at logical odds with the happy ending. Uh, and this new wave we're seeing of dystopia doesn't do that. So you want to pay attention to that because engagement brings about harm. Now, unlike many of the books, including something like one of the ones we're going to read, the first of 3 books were in it, about the only one that takes place on another planet, of the boy and the girl getting together. In the end, it's suggested, let's say, that they're going to become the leaders. Doesn't happen here. I mean, you'll see. I mean, people die. And people get hurt and, in fact, burned, literally and figuratively. And that's one of the controversial aspects of this series of books, is that these books bring into questions very difficult ideas that are not, sugar-coated, if you will. Now, a lot of people concentrate all their attention on the idea of the love match, and this book is really about the turmoil or chaos all adolescents feel. And I'm sure that's realistic because at the age of uncertainty and relation between boys and girls and sex and all those kinds of things come into play. I mean, Peter will mention it once. I mean, it's always there. Like she's saying that last kiss of Peter's that she says, and then they were interrupted, and then she kissed Gail, and there's kind of like a lingering there. These are real feelings, but the love triangle in these books is very endemic to the quality because those personal relationships are a lot of times at the center of an adolescent's life, and that's in the beginning of our book. And if you will, as Peter says, well, when Joanna takes her top off and everything and embarrasses poor Katniss, Peter says, oh, they're just making fun of you because you're so pure. And she, boy, that doesn't sit well with her. But the fact of the matter is that she doesn't talk about that a lot because there's other things that are going on there. And, I mean, what guy, well, and girls, women, is telling someone, I just want to be a friend, is like the kiss of death and not easy to say, and all those other kinds of things that are involved and blah, blah, blah. You're not going to escape that in human relations. But see, that's used as a foundation to engage us in issues of more complexity. And I think you're going to find most books that involve teenagers. The next one, Carbon Diaries 2015, we'll have a young lady, and we'll have basically not an apocalyptic view, but one that's consistent with, let's say, ideas of global warming and things along those lines. But she's not interested in necessarily what caused all that stuff. We're, in this book, we were told that there was catastrophic events occurred that had to do with the environment. There was a horrible civil war in the United States. We're not really told how all that came about. It's just that's the starting point, and this is the possibilities of what could happen. Always a great way to talk about a problem from today is that you separate it from, and in some ways extrapolate it from conditions today. Say, well, in order to look at the politics of these power and things like that, let's just start as fresh as you can. And of course, you can never really start fresh because the ideas are there and the use of power and all those things. So use that as a kind of way, a gate, a window into looking at contemporary issues. And if you have a young audience like this, teenage romance and confusions are a great way to engage the reader, to get her and him to think about the contemporary issues. And so you're going to find that it starts out very personal for Katniss. She doesn't like to listen to Gale complaining. What can we do? Into the fact that she has to volunteer and become a tribute to save her daughter, and then the idea to save Peter, to save these things. And eventually that personal trauma turns into something that engulfs the entire country. And so it's people involved in not just their own little worlds, but required by circumstances to engage. And it eventually involves not just a community or a family, but a country. And then you'll see the consequences of it. So enjoy your reading. I look forward to talking with you again later in the week, perhaps not until Thursday. We'll just see how often I can get in a place where I can upload videos. But email's good.